revenge. For us. For us. For us.
They applauded when I failed, and the sound landed in my chest like a fist. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The applause came softly, politely, the kind of mockery that hides behind manners. The wine glasses chimed. There was someone laughing too long. Another whispered something behind a manicured hand. It was the kind of night that should have meant celebration. The crystal lights, champagne bubbles, the illusion of family unity. But I could feel at the moment I stepped into the room, they'd been waiting for this. It was a slow, civilized clap at first, the kind meant to sting politely. Then the laughter grew, blending with the scent of wine and old perfume. My brother raised his glass like he'd won something. My father leaned back, satisfied, and my mother smiled the way people do when pretending not to enjoy cruelty. I stood in the center of that perfect living room, all polished wood and family portraits, feeling the floor tilt beneath me. In my coat pocket, the eviction notice was already soft from the rain. My phone still showed the message I hadn't meant to open. Your account has been frozen. Beside me, a single box held what was left of my life. They were celebrating my undoing. They had been rehearsing it, making polite jokes and veiled bets over dinner for weeks. The charity gala that would have introduced my little online shop to the city's tastemakers had been canceled after some accounting hiccup. My loan application had been denied at the last second. The whisper that moved through the room, "I told you she'd never make it," was not new. What was new was the way every voice in the room softened to the same tone of satisfied inevitability. Someone pressed another glass of champagne into my hand. I remember staring at the bubbles, the tiny sparks of gold light caught inside them, wondering how something so fragile could hold so much noise. That was when it hit me. This wasn't failure. It was an execution. My name is Maya Clarkson. I'm 32, a freelance product designer by trade, and, until recently, the founder of a small plant and lifestyle brand I built on nights and weekends. I styled wiring diagrams into brand systems and turned coffee breaks into prototypes. I believed that work, done well and honestly, would be its own kind of proof. That night, proof burned like paper. There is a particular sound when people stop defending you. It is a soft, even exhale that carries relief. The chandelier above the dining table trembled slightly, catching the low light and splitting it into shards that danced across the lacquered floor. The clock on the mantel kept its indifferent tick. Outside, rain stitched the city into a blind white. Inside, my family wrapped themselves in a narrative where my failure was not a tragedy but a spectacle. They said the things families say when they are choosing sides. We thought you were chasing fantasies. You were never practical. Maybe it's for the best. My brother's voice, the one I'd heard boast about his stability over brunches, called me a dreamer in a way that felt like an accusation. My father, who had taught me to hold a pen properly, told me, with the gentle gravity of someone lecturing a student, that business was not about feelings. It was about leverage. He held up a glass as if toasting. And for a wild second, I imagined the liquid inside shattering like a crystal skull. I tasted iron at the back of my throat, and, strange and immediate, I felt a seed of something colder than grief push up inside me. Not rage, not yet. Something quieter. The clear, crisp possibility that they had just shown me exactly what they were willing to be. There is a particular clarity that follows humiliation. While my heart was hammering, while my hands were still unsteady from the taxi that had driven me here in the rain, an absurd calm washed through me. I used to believe silence was safety. Now I know it was strategy. Failure had been the machete they used to clear a path. But failure had also given me a disguise. They thought they were witnessing my end. They did not know they were watching the first chapter of a plan I had not yet named. The room smelled of roast chicken and expensive candles. The laughter softened into commentary. They passed my boxes like a casual mob, inspecting the contents with the baffled curiosity people reserve for the small, inexplicable choices of those they have already decided to dismiss. A neighbor popped her head in to offer condolences that sounded alarmingly like congratulations. "Oh, Maya, we had no idea. So sudden." Her eyes skimmed past me to the empty space where my company's prototype kits had once sat on a shelf. I carried my coat and the eviction notice like a witness. Each step away from that living room felt like peeling a bandage. The city swallowed me in its damp, gray arms. My phone buzzed. More messages, some with the practiced sympathy of people who never intended to offer help. I sat on the curb and let the rain steady me. For the first time that night, I let myself breathe, and the breath tasted like a decision. They had cheapened my name in their private jokes. They had turned my work into a punchline. They had assumed that the life I had built in the margins, the nights spent grafting together prototypes, the half hours between client calls when I packed orders, was nothing but a whim. They were wrong. Failure had become my disguise. Their laughter had become a ledger I would balance. But that wasn't where my story began. To understand how I got there, you need to see what came before the fall. Here at True Revenge, we bring you the most gripping and emotional stories of betrayal and justice served cold. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss the next reckoning. Before the fall, my life looked simple from the outside, the kind of simplicity people confuse with stability. I lived in a small, sunlit apartment above a florist shop on Brookhaven Street. Mornings smelled like roses and wet pavement. By habit, I'd brew coffee before sunrise and water the dozen potted plants that lined my window ledge, herbs, succulents, and one stubborn fiddle leaf fig that refused to grow. That ritual grounded me. In a world that prized noise and spectacle, nurturing something small felt like an act of rebellion. My work table took up half my living room. It was scarred with years of sketches, spilled resin, and soldering burns, proof that I'd built something with my own hands. I designed functional lifestyle objects, minimalist lamps, plant pots, and small decor that combined technology with sustainable materials. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. The business was called Haven Home. I'd started it 3 years ago with $2,000 saved from late-night freelance work, and the kind of hope that keeps you awake more than caffeine ever could. What began as an Etsy store grew into a modest local brand. I wasn't rich, but I was proud. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't borrowing money from anyone. Not even my family. Especially not my family. My parents, Robert and Evelyn Clarkson, had built their lives around appearances. They owned a real estate firm known more for its cocktail parties than its client list. To them, reputation was a currency you spent to buy belonging. At family dinners, my father spoke about leverage as if it were a moral compass. My mother measured success by invitations, who you dined with, who you sat next to at charity galas, which magazines mentioned your name. My older brother, Ethan, inherited that worldview effortlessly. He was polished, confident, and born knowing how to take up space. He worked in the family business and liked to call himself the legacy. I was something else, the experiment. Where they saw certainty, I saw curiosity. Where they built empires, I built prototypes. And though I loved them, I always sensed a quiet distance, as if I were a beautiful flaw in their perfect picture. When I first told them about Haven Home, I remember my father's laugh. Designing plant pots? Maya, darling, that's a hobby, not a business. My mother's smile followed, sweet and slicing. Well, at least it will keep you busy. Only Ethan pretended encouragement. He'd lean over, squeeze my shoulder, and whisper, "Ignore them. Just make sure you don't need their money later." He said it like a joke, but there was a warning inside it, a line drawn in invisible ink. Still, I tried to earn their respect, the only way I knew how, through quiet success. I said yes to small commissions, taught myself digital marketing, and learned how to pitch to investors. My best friend and business partner, Clara Reyes, was the only person who saw how hard I worked. She handled the operations side, invoices, vendors, shipping, while I designed and crafted. We met at a product fair 3 years earlier, both of us struggling to be taken seriously by buyers who dismissed us as girls with side projects. Clara had this grounded, unshakable energy. When I doubted myself, she'd say, "We're not failing, Maya. We're learning publicly." That's the difference between people who dream and people who don't. We spent countless nights hunched over my kitchen table, surrounded by takeout boxes and test samples. When orders came in, we packed them ourselves. When money was short, we reinvested every dollar. It wasn't easy, but it was honest. Then, 6 months before everything unraveled, I received an email that felt like a doorway: the Silverline Design Grant. It was a city-sponsored award given annually to support small, sustainable startups. The grant came with funding, media coverage, and a chance to present at the Winter House Expo, an event that attracted investors and designers from across the country. Winning it could change everything. When I told my family over dinner, their reaction was muted. My father stirred his drink. Grants are just charity for people who can't compete in the real market. My mother sighed, pretending concern. "You're still doing this on your own, right? We can't afford another Clarkson headline about failure." Ethan, as always, smiled the smile of someone who already believed he knew how my story ended. "Don't take it personally, Maya," he said, raising his glass. "It's just business." That was his favorite phrase. Just business. He said it when firing staff. He said it when breaking contracts. I used to think it meant discipline. Now I know it meant permission to be cruel without guilt. Despite their indifference, the months leading to the expo were the most hopeful of my life. Every morning began with coffee, work, and sunlight filtering through the sheer curtains, my version of prayer. Clara and I pushed ourselves harder than ever. We redesigned packaging, improved materials, and built a new website. The night before the expo, she came over with a bottle of champagne. We stood on my balcony watching the city lights. "You ready to show them what failure looks like when it refuses to quit?" she teased. I smiled. "They'll have to clap for me, eventually." It was meant as a joke. I didn't know how prophetic it would become. The next day felt like the culmination of years. The exhibition hall glowed with white light. Our booth, Haven Home, stood between two luxury design brands. We felt like underdogs, but our table drew curious eyes. People loved the minimalist designs, the sustainable pitch, the smart sensors that helped plants thrive. By afternoon, a local journalist asked for an interview. I could barely keep the excitement contained. "We're not just designing objects," I said, smiling into the microphone. "We're designing moments of peace for everyday spaces." That line ended up being quoted in 2 lifestyle blogs by evening. It felt like momentum. And that's when Ethan appeared. He was dressed like he always was, tailored suit, casual confidence. He congratulated me in front of the journalist, called me the creative one in the family. It sounded affectionate. But when I met his eyes, something in them glittered too cold to be pride. Later, Clara leaned in. "Why do I get the feeling he's not here to support you?" I brushed it off. "It's Ethan. Everything's a performance." But a few days later, the performance became a plot. I started noticing small disruptions. Delayed supplier payments, missing inventory, an email chain I was never copied on. At first, I blamed it on mismanagement. Then one morning, I woke up to a frozen business account. The bank told me the grant funds were on hold pending an ownership verification dispute. Someone had filed a claim asserting partial rights to Haven Home. The claimant's name, Ethan Clarkson. He had submitted fabricated contracts, claiming he'd been an early investor and deserved equal partnership. The documents even bore a forged version of my signature. I remember sitting at my desk staring at the screen as the morning sun turned my coffee cold. Clara rushed in, pale, holding her phone. "Maya, your father's firm is listed as representing him in the filing." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was absurd. My family, who had mocked my dreams, was now trying to claim them. And yet, some part of me wasn't surprised. I had always known they valued ownership over kinship. They couldn't let me build something they hadn't approved or controlled. Over the next weeks, the chaos spread. Vendors refused to ship until the dispute was resolved. Orders were canceled. Our accounts bled fees and penalties. I fought to keep up appearances, telling customers everything was fine. But inside, I felt the walls closing in. When I called my father to confront him, his tone was chillingly calm. "Maya, you should be grateful your brother's helping you formalize things. You're out of your depth. This is just business. Just business." 2 words that ended my company, my savings, and whatever illusion of family I had left. The Silverline Grant Board revoked our funding pending investigation. The Winter Expo spotlight dimmed as quickly as it had shone. By the time the case was settled, Haven Home was legally frozen. The business I'd spent years building was dead on paper. And that was how I ended up in that living room, surrounded by people who clapped when I failed. They believed it was over. They didn't know failure was only the disguise I needed. That night after leaving their house, I walked through the rain until the city blurred into streaks of gold and gray. My reflection in every dark window looked like someone else, a version of me that had stopped asking for permission. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just listened to the echo of my brother's laughter, to my father's condescension, to the silence that followed when I stopped defending myself. And somewhere in that silence, I heard something clearer than anger, a plan beginning to breathe. But before there was strategy, there was truth to uncover. Because I didn't just want revenge, I wanted understanding. And that began with discovery. The next morning began with light, gentle, golden, deceptive. It filtered through my blinds, touching everything in my apartment, as if to remind me what calm used to look like. My coffee steamed on the table. My inbox glowed with unread messages. I had spent the last few weeks clinging to the illusion that things might still be fixable. Then the phone rang. It was Clara. Her voice trembled in a way I had never heard before. "Maya, there's something you need to see." She sent a link. My hands shook as I clicked. It was a press release from the Clarkson Group, my family's real estate company. The headline read, "Introducing Haven Collective, a new sustainable design venture by Ethan Clarkson." I read it twice before my mind could process the words. The article detailed Ethan's visionary approach to merging modern home design with sustainability. It described product lines, branding, and even prototypes, my prototypes. The photos were unmistakable. The same pots I had crafted by hand, the same designs I had sketched on sleepless nights. And at the bottom, in smaller print, in collaboration with the Silverline Foundation, in continuation of our family's legacy of innovation. My name wasn't there. Not once. The grant I had fought for, the brand I had built, and the credit I had earned, all wiped clean, rewritten under my brother's name. My breath caught, sharp and shallow. For a moment, I couldn't tell if I was angry or numb. Both felt too small for what was happening. I called, "Clara, we can fix this. We can sue." Her voice cracked. "They've already filed trademarks for everything. They used your designs, but they changed just enough of the specs to make them look inspired by instead of stolen. Legally, it's airtight. What about the grant?" "Gone. They claimed you signed over rights as part of a family transfer. The documents are notarized." "But I didn't." I know you didn't. But they planned this, Maya. It's been in motion for months." I sank into the nearest chair. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence between us. Too steady, too normal. "I know they've killed it, right?" I whispered. "No," she said softly. "They've taken it." That afternoon, I drove to the Clarkson Group headquarters. The office was glass and marble, cold, flawless, and suffocatingly familiar. My heels echoed across the lobby as I walked to the reception desk. "Is Mr. Clarkson available?" I asked. The receptionist smiled politely. "Do you have an appointment?" I met her gaze, steady. "Tell him his sister's here. He'll make time." A few minutes later, Ethan appeared, every inch the golden air. "Maya," he said warmly, as if I'd dropped by for lunch. "You look tired. You should take a break." I stared at him. "You stole my company." He tilted his head slightly, the same way he used to when pretending confusion as a child. "Your company?" "Maya, Haven Home was an idea we discussed together. I simply formalized it, protected it. You should be thanking me." "Protecting it doesn't mean erasing me." He sighed, almost theatrically. "You didn't have the infrastructure, the team, the capital. It was never going to scale. This way, your work actually sees the light of day. You should be proud." Proud. The word tasted like ash. "You forged my signature." Dad handled the paperwork. He said coolly, "Everything's legal. You know how business works." There it was again. That word. Business. A convenient cloak for every cruelty. I looked around his office. On the wall behind him hung a framed newspaper cover. "The Clarkson Legacy Expands." In the photo, Ethan smiled between my parents, the perfect family portrait. "You don't get to call theft a legacy," I said quietly. He smiled, and it was almost kind. "You've always been too emotional for business, Maya. That's why this was inevitable." That night, I went to my parents' house. Evelyn opened the door herself, wearing a silk robe and her usual calm. "Mom, you knew about this?" I demanded. She sighed, motioning for me to lower my voice. "Of course we did. Ethan discussed it with us weeks ago. We thought you'd understand." "Understand what?" "That you destroyed everything I built." She looked at me like I was being unreasonable. "Darling, it's not destruction. It's redirection. Ethan's project has investors, publicity, structure. He can take your little designs global." "My little designs." She stepped closer, lowering her tone. "You were never built for this world, Maya. You're talented, yes, but fragile. You feel too deeply. That's not sustainable in business." The words landed like slow poison. "Do you hear yourself?" I whispered. "You're proud of what he did." She met my gaze evenly. "I'm proud of what we built as a family. And someday, you'll thank us for keeping your name out of it. Scandals don't suit you." Scandals. That's what she called the theft of my life's work. I turned to leave, but her hand caught my wrist. "Don't make this harder than it has to be, Maya. Let it go." I looked down at her manicured fingers, then back at her eyes, calm, rehearsed, detached. "I already did," I said, pulling free. "A long time ago." The betrayal didn't end with them. A few days later, Clara called again, her voice trembling. "Maya, you should sit down." My stomach tightened. "What now?" "The board at Silverline. They're accusing us of fraud." They claim you falsified ownership documents and misused grant funds. The room spun. They're blaming me? The Clarksons submitted proof that the funds belonged to the new company. It looks like you pocketed the money. There it was. The final cut. Not just the theft of my business, the destruction of my credibility. By week's end, my name was quietly blacklisted across multiple design networks. Collaborations evaporated overnight. The few clients who had admired my work stopped replying. The last order on my shop, a $45 ceramic pot, was refunded automatically after the payment processor closed my account. It was as if I'd never existed. On the seventh night, I sat on my balcony in the dark, rain dripping off the railing. My phone buzzed with a message from Ethan. "No hard feelings, sis. You'll land on your feet." That heart emoji broke something inside me. I threw the phone onto the wet concrete and watched it slide beneath the chair. Silence settled again. I remember staring at the skyline, the glowing city where everyone was always chasing something, always performing success. I had built something pure, something small and honest, and they had turned it into a spectacle. I used to believe that betrayal was loud, dramatic, obvious, cruel, but this kind, it's quiet. It wears a suit and says it's helping you. It smiles while it takes everything. Days blurred into weeks. The apartment grew smaller, emptier. Clara tried to stay optimistic, but I saw the toll it took on her. Investors backed out. Rent was overdue. She moved in with her sister temporarily to save money. One afternoon, she came by to collect the last of our sample boxes. I stood by the window, holding the first ceramic pot I ever made. Imperfect, chipped, but beautiful. Clara placed a hand on my shoulder. "You don't deserve this, Maya, but they will." I looked at her. "You think karma keeps score?" She smiled sadly. "No, but people like them always write their own downfall. You just have to be patient enough to watch." She left that evening, and I stood alone amid the wreckage of what used to be my dream. A week later, I received an invitation, embossed, expensive, to the launch gala of Haven Collective, hosted by the Clarkson Group. My family was throwing a celebration for the company they stole. I read the invitation 3 times, then folded it neatly and placed it on my table. That's when something inside me shifted. A single quiet click. The pain didn't vanish. It just changed shape. It became clarity. That night, I pulled out my old laptop and began reading every document, every email, every receipt connected to Haven Home. I created folders, labeled timelines, and started mapping connections. Somewhere between the tears and the exhaustion, I realized something. They weren't careful. They'd underestimated me. They thought I'd disappear quietly. They didn't know that silence was my weapon. The night of the gala arrived. I didn't plan to attend, but I did. Not to confront them, not yet, but to watch, to see what arrogance looked like when it thought it had won. The event was held at the Grand Marlowe Hotel. The chandeliers glowed gold. Cameras flashed. Reporters mingled with investors. And there they were, my parents, radiant and poised. Ethan, smiling for photographs beside products he couldn't describe if asked. I stood near the back, unnoticed, a ghost among glittering faces. When the presentation began, Ethan took the stage. He thanked the Silverline Foundation, his visionary parents, and the incredible team that brought Haven Collective to life. Applause thundered. Cameras clicked. My name didn't exist. And then, as the lights dimmed for the product showcase, I saw it. The main display, my prototype, the first lamp design I ever created, slightly altered, renamed the Horizon. It turned slowly on the platform under a beam of light, like an artifact stolen from another civilization. For a moment, I felt my knees weaken. Not from grief, from realization. They had taken everything visible, but they hadn't taken what I knew. Every design file, every proof of creation, every timestamp, every confidential email Ethan had forwarded through our shared server before removing my access. I still had fragments. Enough to rebuild the truth piece by piece. As applause filled the room, I turned and walked out. Rain began again, soft, relentless. By the time I reached my car, I wasn't trembling anymore. I was calculating. They called that night their triumph. I called it their confession, because in that glittering room, under all that applause, they revealed the only thing I needed to see: their arrogance. And arrogance, I knew, leaves fingerprints. That was the moment I stopped being their victim. That was the moment I started taking notes. The rain had followed me home that night like it was tracing my steps. By the time I reached my apartment, my hair was damp, my coat heavy. I stood in the doorway for a long time, listening to the slow tick of the clock on my wall, a sound that suddenly felt louder than the world outside. For the first time in weeks, I didn't cry. Grief had burned itself out. What remained was focus, a strange, dangerous kind of calm. They had stolen everything they could see. Now, I would take back everything they couldn't. I started with what I still had, my old laptop. It was scratched, slow, and missing 2 keys, but it held something my brother never thought to delete: memory. I opened the folders from the early days of Haven Home. Each one was like opening a wound. Design sketches, drafts, invoices, late-night messages with Clara about resin ratios and packaging ideas. Then, buried in an old backups folder, I found something I'd forgotten existed: my email archive. Years ago, Clara had insisted on syncing everything to a local drive, just in case. I remember teasing her for being paranoid. Now, that paranoia was my salvation. Inside were hundreds of messages, supplier confirmations, prototypes, even time-stamped attachments showing when every design was first created. I opened each file, naming and sorting them by date. Hours blurred into dawn. Coffee turned cold beside me. The city outside slowly shifted from rain to early light. By morning, I had reconstructed the entire digital history of Haven Home. And then I saw it. A forwarded message from Ethan, dated months before the ownership dispute. He had copied my concept files to his work account using a shared server, then deleted the originals. The attachments were still there. Subject line: potential collaboration, confidential pitch materials. Recipient: robert.clarkson@clarksongroup.com. He'd been planning this long before I knew I was in danger. I leaned back in my chair, the hum of the computer fan filling the silence. For weeks, I'd been asking why they did it. But the real question was how they thought they'd never get caught. Because arrogance, no matter how polished, always leaves a digital trail. I began documenting everything. Every file, timestamp, and invoice. I took screenshots, printed copies, and uploaded them to an encrypted drive. I even logged into my old online store dashboard, which still displayed the design names and registration dates, months before Ethan's company filed trademarks. Evidence was everywhere, hidden in plain sight. But collecting proof wasn't enough. I needed understanding. I needed to see how deep it went. That's when I decided to visit Clara. She had moved into her sister's guest room across town, a small place with pale walls and the constant smell of lavender detergent. When she opened the door, she looked surprised, maybe even relieved. "You look different," she said. "I feel different," I replied. We sat on the couch, laptops open, surrounded by stacks of papers and old notebooks. Together, we pieced the timeline. March, Ethan requests consultation notes for a family sustainability project. April, my father's firm quietly registers a new subsidiary, Haven Collective Ltd. May, My Silverline grant approval email mysteriously forwards to Ethan's address. June. The legal dispute is filed. Every step perfectly timed. Every betrayal coordinated. Clara frowned at the documents. This isn't sloppy, Maya. It's strategic. Good, I said quietly. That makes it easier to predict them. Over the following weeks, I became someone else entirely. My mornings began before sunrise. No coffee, no plants, no small talk. Just research. I learned more about intellectual property law in 3 weeks than I had in my entire life. At night, I studied financial filings, board records, and charity disclosures. One detail caught my eye. The Silverline Foundation's recent donations had all gone through an intermediary company, Ravencourt Holdings. It sounded familiar. I searched the corporate registry. Registered owner, Evelyn Clarkson. My mother. She hadn't just known about the fraud. She had funded it. I stared at the screen, the cursor blinking like a heartbeat. So it wasn't just business. It was ambition, disguised as family unity. They hadn't done this to help Ethan. They'd done it to keep control of everything they couldn't understand. For days, I carried that knowledge like a secret flame. Small, contained, but burning hotter each time I replayed their words in my head. You should be grateful. It's just business. Let it go. They had rewritten my story, turned me into a failure to preserve their illusion of perfection. But now, I had their blueprint. One evening, I received an unexpected message. It was from an anonymous number with a single line. I know what they did. Meet me tomorrow, 8 p.m., the rooftop of the Silverline building. For a moment, I thought it was a trap. Then I noticed the signature. D. Rowan. I recognized the name. David Rowan, a former Silverline accountant who had quietly resigned after the Clarkson partnership began. Clara insisted I shouldn't go alone, but I went anyway, because if someone inside Silverline was willing to talk, it meant their perfect narrative was already cracking. The next night, the city was cold and sharp. When I stepped onto the rooftop, David was already there, mid-40s, rumpled suit, eyes darting toward the streetlights below. You're brave for coming, he said softly. Or stupid. He smiled faintly. They said the same about me once. He explained everything in a voice barely above a whisper. The Clarkson Group had offered Silverline's board donation incentives in exchange for naming rights and partnership publicity. Ethan's fake ownership documents had been quietly approved because rejecting them would expose Silverline's complicity. They framed it as a family transfer to protect their reputation. He said, but what they really wanted was control of your brand before the next investment cycle. So they bought their silence. More like leased it, he said grimly. Silverline's ethics committee is opening an internal review. If you have proof, now's the time. He handed me a small flash drive. Everything I could get before they locked my access. When he turned to leave, I called out, "Why are you helping me?" He hesitated. Because I watched them destroy something honest. And because I don't want to work for people who call theft a partnership. Then he was gone, swallowed by the dark stairwell. That night, I sat in front of my computer, heart pounding as I opened the files. They contained internal Silverline communications, emails between executives, payment receipts, scanned agreements. My family's fingerprints were everywhere. In one message, a Silverline director wrote, "Ensure Ms. Clarkson's name is omitted from all press materials per Mr. Clarkson's legal directive." Another contained a scanned memo from my father. "Maintain unified messaging. Any public statements must align with the Clarkson Group's ownership narrative." It wasn't just betrayal. It was orchestration. Over the next few days, I assembled everything into a single master file: timelines, documents, internal emails, timestamps, voice memos. I labeled it the ledger. It wasn't evidence anymore. It was a story, the true version. Every line proved that my fall wasn't a failure. It was a theft. And yet, part of me hesitated. I could leak this to the press. I could destroy them overnight. But then what? Would that heal me, or just feed them more attention? I remembered something Clara once said. Real revenge isn't exposure. It's education. She was right. I didn't want spectacle. I wanted balance. And balance requires timing. A week later, I met Clara again at a quiet coffee shop. She looked at me for a long moment before speaking. You found something. Enough to ruin them. Then what are you waiting for? Patience, I said. They taught me that. I spent the next month preparing. Quietly, calmly. I registered a new company name under an alias, Haven Designs. I built a new product line, the ones they hadn't touched yet, the ideas I'd sketched but never produced. Meanwhile, the ledger grew thicker. I added every detail of their corruption, every bribe, every hidden account. But the most damning document came from an unexpected source, my mother's assistant. She emailed me late one night, subject line, "You didn't get this from me." Attached was a scanned letter from Evelyn Clarkson to a Silverline board member, requesting a discretionary payment to suppress any potential reputational conflicts tied to Haven Home's original founder. Her signature was unmistakable. That was the piece that turned evidence into leverage. The next morning, I printed 3 copies of the ledger. One for Silverline's ethics committee, one for my attorney, and one for me. Then I placed the flash drive David gave me in an envelope and sealed it. On the back, I wrote a single word: insurance. As I slid the envelope into my desk drawer, I felt something I hadn't in months: control. They had taught me how to fight quietly, how to smile while scheming. They thought they'd built me too fragile to survive the fall. They were wrong. They had built their own undoing. When the next Silverline quarterly review arrived, the board announced a surprise audit, citing concerns over irregular partnership filings. Rumors began to spread within industry circles. A few journalists started asking quiet questions. For the first time, my family was no longer the ones telling the story. I sat by my window that night, watching the city lights blink below. The same street where I used to feel small now felt like a chessboard, and I finally knew my next move. The goal wasn't just revenge. It was resurrection. To take what they'd buried, my name, my work, my truth, and make it bloom again. That's how discovery feels when it's complete. Not like victory, not like rage, like quiet certainty, the kind that doesn't need to shout because it already knows how the story ends. And mine was only halfway written. When you've spent months watching the outlines of a lie get sharper, strategy stops feeling like revenge and starts feeling like work you're meant to do. I woke up the morning after Silverline announced the audit with a simple list on my kitchen table. No drama, no speeches, just a black pen and 5 words at the top of the page: evidence, leverage, timing, allies, and exit. If discovery had given me the facts, this plan would turn the facts into balance. Evidence. I was going to harden it. I already had the ledger. But evidence in a courtroom, an ethics review, or a board meeting is not the same as evidence in a spreadsheet. It needs chain of custody, corroboration, and context. I spent the next days converting every file into an auditable set, timestamps cross-checked, metadata preserved, original emails exported, and every copy hashed and backed up to 3 separate encrypted drives. I created a simple index, not for lawyers or journalists, but for me, a map I could read at 2 in the morning and still know exactly where each piece fit. Leverage. Make it useful. Raw shame can burn, but leverage opens doors. The most damning thing I found wasn't a single email or a bribe receipt. It was the pattern. How decisions were routed through family members and front companies to disguise payments. How timelines consistently favored the Clarkson narrative. How the trademark filings mirrored my original drafts down to the same color palette code. I compiled those patterns into a visual dossier. A single-page overview showed cause and effect, who benefited, how, and when. That one sheet would do more than anger. It would make leaders accountable. Timing. Be patient. There is a sweet spot for every revelation. Too early, and you're dismissed as angry. Too late, and they've rewritten history again. Timing is the hinge on which justice swings. So I watched. I tracked Silverline's press calendar, Clarkson Group board meetings, and industry conferences. I made a ledger of their routines, who traveled, when, which lawyers they consulted, when quarterly reports were due. I waited for a moment when exposure would create irreversible consequences for them, but not collateral damage for the innocents around them. Allies. Quiet, credible, loyal. I would not, under any circumstances, attempt this alone. Revenge that looks like a vendetta loses its moral high ground fast. So I recruited people who could turn documentation into action without theatrics. Clara, first and always. She agreed to serve as project manager for the product relaunch, to make sure the designs I'd quietly prototyped were spotless and market-ready. Her confidence steadied me the way a hand steadies a diver on the edge. David Rowan, the disgruntled accountant. He had access to internal Silverline threads and the courage to leak them. He became our eyes on the inside, supplying corroborating emails and testifying to procedural oddities. He'd risked his career, once all ready to do the right thing. This time, he wanted to see it finish cleanly. A lawyer, not one of the Clarkson attorneys I'd expected, but a boutique counsel recommended by a friend of Clara's. Her name was Renee Park, practical and unflashy, a woman who spoke in footnotes and deadlines. She insisted we record the chain of custody the moment I handed over anything. She also introduced me to a compliance consultant at Silverline who had recently left on uneasy terms. The consultant agreed to help with the internship of audit evidence. Again, quietly, legally, thoroughly. Exit. Protect myself. Control meant knowing how I'd leave the room once balance was restored. I set up a blind trust for potential settlements and anonymous donations we might need to make to protect employees who could be collateral damage. I also prepared a simple public narrative we could release once the audit had teeth, one that preserved dignity while being impeccably factual. I practiced that narrative until it no longer felt like performance. The execution would be surgical. No leaks. No TV cameras. In my mind, the plan was a series of tiny moves, each dependent on the one before. If one failed, we adapted. If one succeeded, we advanced. Step one was the product relaunch. While my father and Ethan argued public ownership narratives, Clara and I quietly seeded the market with prototypes made under the alias M. Haven Designs. We sourced manufacturing through third-party vendors, used neutral packaging, and launched a soft preview to influencers who specialize in sustainable home goods, people who never covered family business scandals. The product buzz would establish market value independent of the Clarkson name. If we could prove demand for the idea under any banner, we undermined their argument that the designs had no independent worth. Step two was the legal pressure. Renee prepared a sealed brief to Silverline's ethics committee, including the most objective pieces of the ledger, the financial trails, the payment receipts, and the email chains that showed coordination between Clarkson Group and Silverline executives. We demanded an external investigator. We included language that asked for immediate protection for any employees who might be retaliated against for giving testimony. We did not call for criminal charges. Not yet. We asked only for transparency. Step 3 was strategic exposure. David gave us an internal memo that explicitly referenced a Clarkson request to omit a founder's name from press releases. It was the sort of thing that, when paired with our product traction, made Silverline's continuing complacency indefensible. Renee drafted a concise letter for the press desk of a respected business, Weekly. Not a sensationalist outlet, but one that cared about corporate governance. The letter offered the magazine an opportunity: verify our evidence, and we would sit for an on-the-record interview. Quiet, not vengeful. Factual, not theatrical. Step 4 was contingency. If Silverline stalled, Renee would file a procedural complaint with the regional regulator. If Clarkson Group sought to sue us for defamation, we would counter with a chain of custody documents and the independent corroboration from former Silverline staff. The legal architecture had to be airtight because I wasn't interested in muddying the moral water with lawsuits that dragged on for years. I wanted a clean, indelible set of consequences that forced accountability. There were moments when I worried about what I'd become. Sitting in the small conference room with Clara, drawing timelines on a whiteboard, I would catch myself enjoying the clarity of a plan too much. Was I savoring justice or the power to hurt? It's a reasonable question, and one I ask myself often. Renee noticed before I did. One afternoon she said, gently, "Maya, checks and balances aren't the same as vengeance. Keep your aim on restoration, not revenge for its own sake." Her words became a filter. When we drafted emails or revised press language, we ran them through a simple test. Does this resolve the harm? If the answer was no, if the action simply inflicted pain, we adjusted. That moral constraint shaped the plan in useful ways. We chose a disclosure path that exposed wrongdoing and protected employees. We built the product launch to reestablish the brand integrity I'd lost, not to humiliate my family. We refused to weaponize private pain. That restraint made our case stronger. It kept us credible. On the day we submitted Renee's sealed brief to Silverline's ethics committee, I felt the same strange calm I had felt the first night I realized the theft. The ledger was thick in her hands, photocopies bound and notarized. She placed it on my desk like a returned favor. Her expression said what I felt. Now we let the system work. Before she left, she stood in my doorway and added one practical detail I didn't expect. If the board resists, we leak the timeline to the regulator next. If the regulator stalls, we publish the product traction figures publicly and let the market speak. It was a legal ladder with each rung tested. That night, after Renee left, Clara and I sat on the fire escape with lukewarm takeout and watched the skyline breathe. The city lights blinked like a scoreboard. I thought of every person who had laughed when I failed, colleagues who dismissed my designs, family dinners that ended with a joke at my expense, the cold, bright moment when my father told me to move on. My mouth felt dry. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt ready. And to be ready is an odd kind of power. It is not the flash of fury you see on talk shows. It is the long, slow gathering of resources, alliances, and timing until equilibrium becomes inevitable. One more thing, I told Clara. If this works, I want the proceeds from the relaunch designs to fund a small creative grant for women makers, a scholarship in Clara's name. She laughed, then cried a little, then hugged me. "Make it happen," she said. There it was, revenge that created something better than the original, a plan that returned dignity and produced opportunity. That was the kind of balance I wanted. We slept, not peacefully, but with purpose. The next morning, I woke to emails, Silverline confirming receipt of Renee's brief, a short note from David that he'd secured another internal memo, and a line from Renee, "Wait for the audit. Timing is our ally." I closed my eyes and whispered to myself a sentence I'd say often over the next few months. Patience is not passivity. It is preparation. If you're drawn to stories where calm turns to power, stay with us. Subscribe to True Revenge for more tales of justice served quietly. There's a moment in every strategy when waiting ends, when silence becomes action. For me, that moment arrived on a cold Thursday morning, exactly 90 days after we'd filed the ethics brief. It began not with headlines, but with a silence in the Clarkson offices. No press releases, no posts, just quiet. The kind of quiet that meant something was breaking behind closed doors. Renee called at 7:14 a.m. "It's happening," she said simply. "The audit findings are scheduled for internal release this afternoon." I didn't ask for details. I didn't need them. The tone of her voice told me the tide had turned. At noon, Silverline's board meeting was underway. A virtual session streamed to stakeholders, journalists, and investors. The Clarkson Group had been invited to speak about innovative collaborations. I watched from my apartment, laptop open, coffee untouched. Ethan appeared first, immaculate in a tailored navy suit, his voice smooth. "Our partnership with Silverline has been a model of transparency and impact." And then he stopped. The Silverline chairwoman interrupted, face expressionless. "Before we proceed, Mr. Clarkson, the board has reviewed new information regarding Haven Homes' intellectual property." The screen split. A document appeared. My design sketches, my timestamps, my emails, the ledger. Each page flickered like a confession on live feed. These materials indicate that Ms. Maya Clarkson, former co-founder of Haven Home, was the original creator of the intellectual assets presented under Clarkson Group. Effective immediately, the board is suspending all current agreements pending legal review. The silence that followed was exquisite. Ethan's face drained of color. My father's expression froze, the same look he wore at every negotiation when something didn't go according to plan. And then, the sound, a single microphone still live, captured him whispering, "Who leaked this?" That was the moment the internet caught fire. By 2 p.m., business media outlets were running with it. Clarkson Group under ethics review. Silverline severs ties amid alleged IP misconduct. But the real blow wasn't public. It was internal. Silverline suspended its donation agreements and froze pending disbursements. Clarkson Group's share price plummeted 18% within hours. Their investors demanded accountability. And while they scrambled to craft statements, Haven Designs, the quiet alias brand Clara and I had launched, posted its first collection live. Simple caption: "From the ashes of imitation comes authenticity." Within 24 hours, every influencer we'd courted shared the post. By day 2, pre-orders had sold out. And by the end of that week, our tagline, "Haven, reborn by its real creator," was trending across social media. People didn't know the family connection yet. They didn't need to. They just knew something honest was returning. In a different timeline, I might have stopped there. But real balance requires closure, not just victory. So I sent one final email, short, measured, and deliberate, to my family's attorney. Subject: correction of public record. Please ensure all future references to Haven Home correctly list its original founder and creative director, Maya Clarkson. I am prepared to provide notarized documentation verifying authorship and ownership. Respectfully, Maya Clarkson. No threats, no accusations, just truth, presented with surgical precision. 2 days later, my father called. "What have you done?" His voice was low, controlled, the same tone he used in boardrooms. "I told the truth," I said. "You've destroyed your brother's career." "No," I corrected. "He destroyed his own. I just stopped carrying the blame for it." There was silence. Then, almost gently, he said, "You've learned from me after all." "No, Dad. I replied. I learned from what you did to me. I ended the call. For the first time in years, my hand didn't shake. Justice doesn't come with fireworks. It comes with paperwork and silence. Weeks passed. The audit concluded. Silverline issued a formal apology, acknowledging procedural oversights and reinstating my intellectual ownership in public filings. The Clarkson Group quietly announced Ethan's resignation to pursue other ventures. My parents withdrew from the board for personal reasons. They never contacted me again, and I didn't need them to, because while their empire cracked, something far more important solidified: Haven. The brand was thriving. Orders flooded in. Investors, the right kind this time, approached us, offering collaborations that honored creative ownership. Clara's name appeared beside mine on every credit line. One afternoon, as sunlight poured through the office windows, Clara asked, "Do you think they understand what you did?" I thought for a moment. Understanding was never the goal. Consequence was. A month later, a journalist reached out requesting an interview for a feature titled "The Woman Who Rebuilt After Betrayal." I agreed, under one condition. No family names. No drama. Just the story of how integrity can survive theft. The article went viral. It wasn't scandalous. It was inspiring. And that, more than exposure, was my final revenge. Because while they fought to contain a scandal, I'd rewritten the narrative entirely. They'd turned me into the villain of their story. Now, I was the hero of mine. Late one night, as I was closing the office, a message arrived from an unknown number. "You won." D. Rowan. I smiled, typing back. "No, we all did." Justice, when it's done right, doesn't shout at all. It whispers. It restores. And that's exactly what I wanted. Not ruin, not chaos, but balance. They laughed when I failed. But failure was never my ending. It was my disguise. They taught me every strategy one needed to bring them down. And I thank them the best way I knew how, by succeeding without them. They stole my work thinking they were taking my power. But power doesn't live in ownership papers or company shares. It lives in persistence, in what you rebuild when no one's watching. There's a strange quiet that comes after justice, not loud, not triumphant. It's the kind of silence that settles when the noise finally leaves your head. Months passed after Silverline's audit and the Clarkson implosion. The world moved on quickly, as it always does. New scandals replaced old ones. Stock tickers climbed again. People forgot the details, but they remembered one name: Maya Clarkson. Not because I won a lawsuit or gave a speech, but because I stood still while everything false fell away. The office we worked in now wasn't glamorous, 2 floors above a quiet cafe in downtown Portland, smelling faintly of espresso and varnish. The space was open, alive. Designs hung on the walls. Clara's laughter echoed across the room whenever something worked right. We'd kept the same mantra written on a whiteboard by the door. Build slow, build honest, build free. Every time I passed it, I smiled, because that was what revenge had become for me. Not payback, but progress. Haven Designs wasn't just surviving. It was leading. Our eco line had been picked up by a major retailer known for ethical collaborations. 2 of my apprentices, women who'd left corporate jobs after burnout, had launched their own product lines under our mentorship. Watching them thrive felt better than any courtroom whenever could. I didn't block my family. I didn't erase them. I just stopped orbiting around them. Ethan moved abroad quietly, taking consulting contracts that never quite matched his former status. My father retired early, citing health reasons. My mother tried to call once months later. I let it ring out, not because I hated her, but because some goodbyes are silent. Their fall wasn't cinematic. It was slow, procedural, bureaucratic, the kind that doesn't make headlines but changes everything. They didn't lose everything. They just lost access to my loyalty, to my silence, to the part of me that once believed love could fix betrayal. Sometimes I wonder if they understand what really happened. That I didn't ruin them. I revealed them. Success after betrayal doesn't feel like victory. It feels like calm. For a long time, I used to dream of apologies that never came, words that might have made the past lighter. But apologies can't rebuild trust. Only truth can. And the truth was this. They taught me everything I needed to destroy the version of myself that still needed their approval. Now, I teach that to others. Every year, I fund a small creative scholarship for young designers, people who've been overlooked or dismissed. It's named after the night everything changed, the Ledger Grant, because sometimes the only way to rewrite history is to pay it forward. I visit classrooms occasionally, not as a speaker, but as a listener. When students ask about failure, I tell them the truth. Failure isn't the opposite of success. It's the forge that shapes it. One morning, about a year later, I stood in front of a mirror before an interview, the kind that would have once terrified me. The reflection looking back was calm. Older maybe, but grounded. I thought about the girl who once believed silence was weakness. The one who cried in bathrooms and said, "I'm fine," when she wasn't. The one who thought loyalty was proven by endurance. She was gone now. In her place stood a woman who knew that silence can be strategy, that distance can be dignity, and that revenge, real revenge, is never about making them hurt. It's about making yourself whole. That afternoon, after a long meeting, Clara and I walked home along the waterfront. The city shimmered under soft rain. She nudged me, smiling. "You realize you never actually failed, right?" I laughed quietly. "Oh, I did. Many times. But failure isn't the end. It's the part they underestimate." She nodded. "And look how underestimating you turned out for them." We both laughed, but there was no malice in it. Just peace. When I think about the whole story now, it's not the betrayal that stands out. It's the moments of grace that came after. The quiet resilience, the unexpected kindness, the rediscovery of purpose. Because revenge doesn't always have to end with someone's downfall. Sometimes it ends with your own rise. I used to believe revenge was the opposite of forgiveness. Now I know it's the path toward it. Forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's remembering without pain. I once thought they laughed because I was weak. Now I understand they laughed because they saw a reflection of what they feared, someone who could lose everything and still rebuild stronger. That's the part people never talk about. Revenge isn't about winning back what was taken. It's about becoming someone who can never be taken from again. So, if you're listening to this wondering if balance ever comes, it does. Not loudly, not dramatically, but in the small, steady ways life starts loving you again once you stop chasing those who never did. I used to chase approval. Now I protect my peace. That's my real fortune, not the success, not the recognition, but the peace that comes after reclaiming your story. Because in the end, that's what true revenge really is. Not destruction, restoration. They laughed when I failed, but failure was just the lesson I used to build my empire. This was another story from True Revenge, where we turn pain into purpose and betrayal into balance. Subscribe and join us for the next transformation.